Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. In 1959, something was created that would haunt Y2K and that still underpins some of our modern critical infrastructure. That was the dawn of COBOL. 1959 also brought us something quite different, yet similarly significant to our modern society. That was the birth of Barbie. And where COBOL was inspired by the work of a visionary like Grace Hopper, it wasn't until 2010 that Barbie became a computer engineer. She did at least have dual monitors and a Tux Penguin. But this weekend's Barbie movie delivered heart, hilarity, and great dance numbers, along with a message that, like with COBOL, women have been part of computing from its beginning, and everyone should be aware of and take down the barriers that would exclude them from or stereotype them in this industry. Which means, this week we chat with Kristen Bell from GuidePoint about navigating the complexities of AppSec and development so AppSec and dev teams alike can understand the consequences of what they're doing. In the news segment, which is coming up next, RCE and SSH forwarding, CTFs and bug bounties, Nodes VM2 bids adieu, NPM packaging implications, a bad build, and more. Wear some pink and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever. And with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security with Invicti, the zero-noise application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API. With unparalleled accuracy, coverage, and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. Invicti, AppSec with zero noise. Visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. Imperva is the comprehensive digital security leader on a mission to help organizations protect their data and all paths to it. Only Imperva protects all digital experiences, from business logic to APIs, microservices, the data layer, and from vulnerable legacy environments to cloud-first organizations. With an integrated approach combining network, application, and data security, Imperva protects companies ranging from cloud-native startups to global multinationals with hybrid infrastructure. Start a free trial today and quickly protect your web applications at securityweekly.com/Imperva. This is episode 248, recorded July 24th, 2023. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with just John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Checking, I am unmuted. Hey, Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, and I want to give you a special shout out for covering episode 247 as well. That was fun to listen to, and absolutely love the bit of a goofy intro. So everyone has to go back and listen if you don't get my subtle nod there to John's take on that. One other announcement, join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day invitation-only executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We're pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you register with code SECWEEK23. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecuritysummit to learn more and register today. And this makes it easy for us, John. We're doing something a little bit different today. We're starting off with the news, then we'll dive into our interview segment with Kristen. And in the news, there's all kinds of fun things. Now, I thought I was going to lead off with some fun research from Qualys on SSH-Agent forwarding, but you took us right into space. So why don't we start at, let's go in orbit and then see how we can land this thing at the end of, in half an hour.
Definitely. Okay, Major Tom. Yeah, this is a good one. And I know we say this a lot, but this was a fun article. It's actually a paper written by some researchers. I think they're all in Germany. I know they're all in Europe. I see some .e email addresses, so I think they're all Germany. But they start with the idea of, we look around, we don't see a lot of academic research into the security of satellites. And historically, these things they've been hard for us mere mortals down here on planet Earth to try and attack or get access to these things up in space. We've seen some ham radio guys will be able to either interface with them or more commonly listen to them, and you'll see articles out there like, how to download imagery from Russian spy satellites and things like that. But what's interesting here, what sort of allowed them to start going down this path is it's so again, for those of us on the ground, usually the way to communicate with a satellite is through what's called a ground station. Up to, say, before 5 years ago, those things weren't really cheap for an individual to go and purchase and put in your backyard. You're starting to see now with things like SpaceX's, I'm happy to say I don't remember the name of it, but anyways, their thing where they're going to pollute us with a bunch of satellites. Sorry, guys. You can now start getting from them and from others these base stations are these ground stations at a lower cost. And if you don't want to go that way, you can rent the things from either AWS or Azure. So they started looking at these different paths of how do you get communication to these things. And then also they were able to work with some of the folks who have launched some of the smaller satellites in Europe. So I'm talking a class what's usually known as CubeSats. I pondered getting one of these myself, and I couldn't quite figure out a good reason to launch it. You can launch them for, I think, between $5 to $10,000. So it's not like, chump change, like I could pull it out of my pocket, but still like, hey, I can have a satellite in space for, not that much money, but then what do you do with it? And the reason they get these CubeSats are so cheap is because they're running off commodity, really common software and hardware. You can probably start seeing where this is going. The guys started building a lab to reproduce some of the firmware and hardware settings that they had there, and then started digging through what they could find. And what they found was unencrypted protocols, sometimes no authentication, just all sorts of really bad things on these satellites. I think in one case there was a software library they were seeing which was, again, the number is so far back that it makes my head spin. I believe the library was over 10 years old. That was common for these satellites. So this is just, overall bad. But the article, it's not a blog post, not an article, the white paper on this, which you can download for free, does a really good job of sort of bringing people up to speed on some of the things I just talked about, some of the protocols, how these things fit together. It got some threat diagrams in there. It's a pretty good read in a easily accessible way for those who might not be looking at this stuff day in, day out, or even the IoT side of it day in, day out. So that's my first for the week.
It is fun. I was trying to find the link because I think this year DEF CON is also having another satellite hacking village.
Cool.
So if you don't have access to any of this information that John was describing, or you don't have I don't know how much the AWS ground station is, but as a service, but that could be another opportunity to check it out. So fun types of bringing to a very different type of hardware hacking for sure. There's another one that is related to satellites, at least I think signal analysis, oscilloscopes. Now, I have an electrical engineering background, so in college I actually used one of these that was, I don't think, web connected at all at the time. It was a bit dumber than this, but these days you can get RCE on an oscilloscope.
Yes. So with your AA background, you're in for a bit of a treat in this overall space, Mike, because things have really progressed a ton. In large part from a company called, I call it Rigol, it might be Rigol, but RIGOL. And they have a large line of oscilloscopes out there, from Pro down to, it's not just oscilloscopes. They got bench power supplies and things like that as well. I have one of their scopes. But they, on the lower end, they're accessible for someone like me to get. But what's really neat about a lot of their product line is they, A, they're running Linux. And B, they leave them so that people can access them if they want to be able to get access in there. And what that allows you to do on my home scope, I can go in and replace the license key on it, and have full access to a very capable scope with digital sampling and all sorts of great things on there. And it's for me at home. I go do that for free, right? I'm not making money off it. It's a hobby. If you're going to do that in a commercial environment, please go and get the licenses and help support the company like this. But with that, Mike, also another thing that they have on these things is, there's web interfaces. There's Ethernet going into these things. So you can either do remote triggering and things like that if you're doing some sort of IoT hacking, maybe as an example, or you just for some reason want to point and click your oscilloscope without actually using the screen. All that build up in this blog post, which I can't find by notes in our show notes. The individual walks through again sort of how do you download that firmware? Where do you get it? Like, for an update on your scope. Can you run that? Well, can you unzip it? Can you run it locally? How can you sort of build an environment where you can start poking and playing with it? And he finds you can do this in QEMU, our favorite emulator. and virtualization system. And he gets in there and he starts walking through how would he go about looking for finding a vulnerability in the web interface, which he does. So he's able to find a remote code execution. And, for most of us, that's just, okay, hey, that's sort of neat. I imagine if this is being used in a professional setting, someone could use this for malicious intent in an R&D setting, maybe sort of play with someone's results that they're working on for a product. So it has real world consequences, but overall the space is pretty neat.
It is, and it's also speaking of things that are nostalgic, to be able to hack this with a curl command, just and some semicolons separated for some as part of the RCE, the command execution, is just, that will be the dead simple, to use one of my favorite phrases. I'm going to use. You got some other fun stuff that you've nerd sniped me to use a fun phrase this week, but I want to take a moment to riff off of the CTF aspect of that and bring over another article that was possibly interesting, possibly not. Let's find out. But it was Google says an Apple employee found a 0-day but did not report it. Reading into the article, however, was really that this was part of there was a CTF. It so happened a Apple employee, like many others, were participating in this CTF, and the researcher found a 0-day in Chromium, exploited it, collected some points out of the CTF, and then carried on. Now, what was interesting is that I think about 2 weeks later, or 10 to 14 days, the CTF organizers, or one of the organizers, said, "Hey, by the way, Chromium, I want to report this issue to you, just because I'm not sure this came up in our CTF, but I'm not sure if you know about it." And Chromium said, "Actually, we've looked, not a dupe. We haven't heard this one. So thank you for the report. Here's $10,000, and we're going to go and fix this." So there's some interesting angles here in the sense of perhaps reporting relationships between CTFs and bug bounties, or just, I don't think it's so much a Google versus Apple types of thing as the headline might imply, but more of what do you do with, how do we handle bug bounty programs, or how do you handle good incentivization so that someone who's good clearly at finding vulns is incentivized to earn that 10K rather than like, that's just pocket money.
It gives a at least to me, it was an interesting view behind the screen of these CTFs, right? I know how this worked ahead of time already, but still, for those who don't, some of these higher end, I'll say, point winners in these competitions, they're not walking in cold and seeing if they can start hacking over a few hours, right? They're walking in with like a treasure trove of things they've spent the last few months working on, actually, to see if they can find something that no one else finds, or else be able to execute it first in the CTF. So that's what happened in this case. It looked like it was a researcher at Apple. And they had done this beforehand, but we know how Apple works, or a lot of these large companies, all sorts of secrecy and sign off and that type of thing. So the fact that he was able to use this vulnerability in a CTF and get the points for it, that's one thing. But for him to be able to actually announce it and send it in as a thing, then he has to go and start jumping through manager hoops. Is what it is, whatever, right? So yeah, I to me, the interesting aspect of this was, besides just behind the scenes, Mike, was the it's interesting to think about when do you award someone? I think they were right in how they did this. I'm like, okay, well, this is the first person to send it in. Mm-hmm. But if it luckily in this case, the sense I got from looking at things was that and you can actually see a lot of this. You can go through on the bugs which are linked into this article, the trackers. There wasn't a lot of pushback from the original engineer who found it. I think if there had been, or at least maybe publicly, God knows what's going on behind the scenes. If there had been publicly, then it's like, it would have become a little more, I think they still made the right choice, but that would have been difficult, or more difficult. But it's what it is. I leave the drama out of it. Yeah, it's just interesting to see how these things work, and when do you pay someone who gets paid, all that aspect of it. And glad they found it and did the right thing.
Indeed. And I think it's been updated now to say that the 10K is going to be donated as well.
Oh,
but
cool.
I think it is, as you're kind of alluding to there's the social dynamic of bug bounties, reporter versus researcher, finding dupes. There's competition within bug bounties themselves. So just always a good reminder of curating a program requires more than just an analysis of triage of is this a vuln or how bad is this vuln. Speaking of bad vulns and researchers, though, Qualys is back to some very interesting deep dive shenanigans. They've got a person or a team there that just loves reading through Linux, Unix code, and must be, I don't know, but more patience than perhaps either of us. So congratulations there. But I'll predicate this with that it's a remote RCE and SSH-Agent forwarding. Now, this isn't the type of end of the world type of vulnerability because I think, as the write-up says, you need to control the server. So, that's whatever CVSS 4.0 score is right now, that's going to lower it a bit. But what was fun about this is, once again, a great description of how they started to leverage the DL open command and some unexpected or some edge case behaviors of several libraries on Ubuntu systems they just so happened to be using. I can't remember what Barbie computer engineer was using, but she did have Linux on her desktop. But I think for me, a takeaway, in addition to just a really fun deep dive read, which I do encourage to look through their fuzzing, how they went through and did the exploit, is that it also maybe is a reminder to perhaps fuzz or review or harden all of these other libraries that are completely unrelated to OpenSSH on these Linux systems to see, do they have these behaviors with a DL open or a DL close that have signal handlers that are use after free, callback functions that can be use after free, return from syscall use after free. They list a couple of these different issues. And I think that is kind of a neater thing that, yes, there's some OpenSSH fix here to do, but there's probably something like OpenSSF would be interested in cleaning up the entire environment of the Linux system. So I think there's a greater takeaway than just really cool research into the SSH.
Yeah. I mean, as I was commenting on the last one, you don't just walk into these CTFs, and I mean, it takes a lot of research. And I think a lot of our listeners know this, but I always like to say, because it's we'll occasionally in the industry, we'll get lucky and we'll stumble over something. We just happen to TCP sniff, TCP dump the right thing and go, oh, hey, look, this was not that. Yeah, it's there's a lot of work went into this. There, as you said, one correction, bad vulnerability, good research. Or you said bad phones. And anyways, these guys, these guys keep doing great stuff.
Yes.
I know, nitpicky. I don't know if I have much to add. I think this one is it's good, but it's using enough of my brain just to sort of soak the whole thing up that they did. That where I go next, I'm like, it needs a little bit of the deep thought and sort of sitting back and thinking about it. I think you're right, going down the path of OpenSSF or any org like that, sort of taking something like this and how do you use it and leverage it and consume it. And I think not just for SSH itself and these libraries, but take a step back and where can you use this type of, I mean, you're basically, on a few of the stories we're talking about today, we're giving either researchers or developers a breadcrumb, if not literally a how-to on how to go through and either repeat this research, which, hey, there's some good homework, but also how do you do this? Okay, instead of doing this on OpenSSH, let's look at, I don't know, the camera driver on the phone I'm using right now to record this, right? Maybe let's go and poke at that and see what you find out of it. And it's these are great reading, but also think about them. What can you do next?
So one of the things you could do next as a developer is give up. And this isn't necessarily a terrible thing. Actually, I like this approach. I think it's a healthy thing to do. But the Node.js VM2, so this is basically a way to isolate and allow list Node apps to run. They basically said, I do want to quote that we find ourselves facing an escape so complicated that fixing it seems impossible. And as they note, it's not just this one isolated issue. There's been a lot more issues and escapes, and it just looks like sustaining the project just isn't good. So I like this. I mean, it's unfortunate to have to give up on a lot of work. They done some great work over the years, but at least admit if we can't address the risk, let's actually do the right thing for our users. To quote one of my favorite movies, Tron, let's fight for the users and do the right thing here. And also, they point out isolated -VM. there is another package that uses some better primitives within the node ecosystem, and I think V8, so that you can have the better actually secure environment. So I think this is just more of that reminder. It's, deleting code, removing lines, deleting packages are a great security step. And I wonder how easy this would be within an organization just to actually say, we're going to stop using this package and then actually stop using the package. Because I think in the real world, there are deprecations or end of life that are announced on July 24th, 2023, and then that software is still used 2 to 3 years later.
It's a pretty incredible statement. When you think about it, this is not something we see very often. Someone saying, no, we can't fix that. Right? And that's kudos to them for actually saying that instead of trying to slap a Band-Aid on it.
Right.
I guess taking a step back, thinking through what does this mean for the average Node developer, if anything? Are they just going to wait for Node.js? I don't even know what version it is. The next version to come out, right? Hopefully it has is using isolated VM instead. Yeah. And I think actually, if for folks who click through to isolated VM, they also, again, something which we both love to see, there's really good documentation about what's going on here and, the thought process behind this and how they've done it. So, it's a pretty refreshing step for the good. So, kudos on that. That's, again, trying to bring it back to our listeners. I seem to be doing that a lot this week. When do you make that decision on your own product or project? Hopefully not your product. Or library, or how do you have that conversation with your manager or your coworkers of let's be honest, we can't fix this. Right? It's one thing to do as an open source, but how would you do that if you have a product that has, say, $1 million a year revenue on it? That's not that much. And you're saying, we got to, no. So it's, that's again a good thing of what would you do if you had to replace something core like this?
That could be a fun tabletop exercise. Throw that in there. Use that $1 million just as a starting point, as you say. Now, I want to pick up one more NPM article. It's a little bit older, and I think it's sort of building to an FCC article that you have, I think, will be a nice segue here. But this one, a blog post about the massive bug at the heart of the NPM ecosystem. And it's addressing what's I think most simply called manifest confusion, in the fact that in NPM, the package manifest is published independent of its tarball, meaning you can have version numbers that are asserted within one file to be different from what actually exists within the tarball. And if we start, I'm going to use the SBOM magic word here, so I'm not sure if we jazz hands that one just like we do ML and AI. But yeah, thank you, John. But we do need to be able to trust what the packages say they contain. And the idea of SBOMs is that there's, easy, if we can trust them, they're easier to inspect, quicker to inspect. But if we can't trust manifest file, then we have to go in and do all the scanning. And that just becomes a scalability nightmare, just a lot more CPU resources that aren't saving us time like they should be. So this is just one of those areas that's kind of a surprise. You might be vulnerable or not vulnerable, depending on how your SCA scanner is handling these NPM nuances.
Yeah. So first I have to say that was a phenomenal pun. Thank you for that one. I'm not sure what to say here. I'm not sure what else to say here. I like that they're digging in and sort of putting a spotlight on this directly. At the same time, I think this is sort of what we're talking through beginning of the year, end of last year of okay, we got an SBOM, what do you do with it now?
Yeah.
And it's, it does come down a little bit like you're saying of if your tool supports and parses and will do something with it, and that's presuming for some of these folks that they have a tool. Back to the satellite article, one of the things they were seeing was that on these smaller budget projects, which are using these smaller budget satellites, it ain't got no security team, right? So they're not using a security I don't know, I'm going to pick a name off the top of my head, SNCC, right? They're just not using those tools. And they probably are writing some of them in Node. So I like that they are highlighting this once again for us, but we need to see some sort of I think if I was to sum it up, the manifests, or excuse me, the SBOM problem like this is putting all the impetus onto the consumer that they're actually going to do something with it. And I'm not sure. It feels to me I'd really love to see a little more of the security actually handled by the where the origination is coming from, or at least the distribution. So I know it's easier said than done, but I'm going to keep hoping.
Keep hoping. And one of the takeaways from this article even said the shift from the responsibility of there should be more server-side validation, that the manifest and tarball match up rather than just rely on the client to assert that, yeah, these probably match up. Just trust me and go with it. But you mentioned the consumers and consumer responsibilities. FCC is out here to help you out, John.
Yes.
They're coming up with a U.S. Cyber Trust Mark, which the logo actually, the design actually looks kind of cool.
I mean, once you got the logo, I mean, it's all downhill from there.
Downhill from there, yeah, it's easy.
You know, we will be starting pretty soon security design, our design security weekly for our listeners. We'll talk about our favorite shade of Barbie pink. Yeah, so this is similar to what we've seen from UK as well as Europe, as well as, well, let's just leave it at those two. What stood out here, a few things. There's a pull quote on this article from The Verge. Thinks Energy Star, but for the security of smart devices. So I don't know about y'all. So for those outside the US, Energy Star is sort of a similar sort of labeling program we have here in the US. If you go and buy an appliance or a laptop, really anything electrical, it sort of shows you, gives you some sort of stamp of like good, bad, whatever. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, quite honestly, that's all I know about it. I couldn't tell you what's a good Energy Star if I'm looking at a package. I got no idea. I know if we talk about like real estate and buildings, like where some of us work, if it has like a LEED Gold, I know what that means. Like it's an efficient building, but I couldn't tell you what Energy Star levels are. So that's, I think, part of the problem around this. You can come up with the labels, but then I don't even know if like on Energy Star does it literally have like different star numbers. I have no idea. And I see these things probably on, not just things I have purchased, but I'm sure there's something in my house which still has that stupid sticker on it, and I still couldn't tell you what it means. So that's one side. On the other side, what I thought was really neat here, and I don't think I've seen this in the other standards so far, is they make a distinction between the security of the device, which they want to have on the label, but also the security of the product. And by that, what they're referring to is the device is that little thing which you can hold in your hand, like the IoT, whatever it is. But the product is, that thing doesn't exist by itself, right? It talks to the cloud or something else, or Wi-Fi or, Zigbee or whatever else. But the end-to-end security, they're actually also considering in there for something for people to be able to understand. I thought that was I hadn't seen it pointed out like that before, and I thought that was pretty neat. But I don't know, Mike, if you had any thoughts on this.
They have, unlike Energy Star, they're going to throw some QR codes are expected to accompany this, which maybe be a little bit more helpful. So you can at least point your camera at it and
cool.
send
so
you a link somewhere.
I can have an injection attack on the product just by having someone look at it. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think in addition to that potential threat vector, what's nice is they also will basically, what am I trying to say? Time in relative dimension in space. That that link will tell you if the device is still certified, simply because there are new 0 days, new patches may come out, new vulnerabilities may emerge, and so you may be trusted in July of this year, but 1 year from now, it may no longer be trusted because Qualys researchers have found another fun thing in the IoT, or some of our listeners have decided to play around with some of the devices and oscilloscopes or downloading firmware. So I think that time dimension, I think, is a nice consideration, so that we don't just say, yeah, it was good once and it's good forever.
And on the other side of that time equation, for our listeners who would love to get active in something like this, the FCC is just really sort of touching their feet in the waters on this. But also, NIST has a National Institute of Standards and Technology has a working group around this. So maybe you can go get involved and help them scope out what this is actually going to look like once it hits the road.
And let us know what's been interesting in there too. As a reminder too, that it's good you're talking about that participation. I did mention CVSS 4.0. I think we've got one more week to provide feedback. I think it's open for industry feedback or community feedback until July 31st. But there's actually now, John, 2 other articles I want to bring in that I need to test the waters here. I think they're maybe not interesting, but I included them anyway. So let me tell you why. One, speaking of, so you mentioned NIST. Here's CISA coming back. So we've got another fun government entity. They got a fact sheet for free tools for cloud environments, which headline I think is great. Free tools. It would be wonderful to have free tools for securing satellites. But then I looked at the tools and it was sad trombone noises. And I was kind of like underwhelmed by their choices. And I think part of me is just, yes, tools do not make a cloud security strategy, but then the tools themselves don't strike me as well organized or described, other than like, if you get hacked, here's some ways to help you with forensics. But there just felt like there were some things missing there. So I think if I were going to say a call to action for our listeners, what tools would you throw onto this list? And even John, maybe to put you on the spot, I know you just did some fun AWS education on your own. Would you rely on just some AWS native tools or some other free tools that come to mind for you?
I definitely would not rely on. I'm sorry. Did you say AWS free tools? You must be new to Amazon. Free? Yeah, I turned on Security Hub on my home account and
blow up.
Oh no, it wasn't Security Hub. Security Hub gave me a bit of a bill, but then I'm also playing with sending logs from. See, you got me talking about this. Using CloudWatch metrics to send logs and metrics from my home machines up into the cloud, see if I could like do like a SIM type thing like that. And I got a bill from that too. And I have a very small environment, but neither people want to see those bills either. So plenty of open source tools out there, which somehow didn't make this list. Shout out to the Goose folks in the Kubernetes security crowd. They'll like to see that. Mm-hmm. But what happened? I think that's my 2-word takeaway from this one, Mike. Is this is a 4-page PDF that lists like 4 open source. I'm not quite sure what happened there. I would say, and you know where this came from, right? There was a government group out there that said like, you have to tell us what tools to use or else we can't figure out. Because we want to spend money or whatever the reason was. So they threw something together. But this is, please, folks, go and help them with this. We should be able to close our eyes through a rock and think about or come up with the name of at least 2 or 3 different open source security tools.
Yeah, I think that what happened is the perfect summary, which I think we should throw that onto your t-shirt list too. I love that as an AppSec logo, AppSec theme. There's another article, Google introduced their AI red team, the ethical hackers making AI safer. They talked about some, I think they had 6 different model attacks, some data security risks, some and they're talking about prompt attacks, backdooring the model, adversarial examples, data poisoning, exfiltration. So I'm just kind of rattling off real quick because it was mostly just a nomenclature of types of attacks. And what was interesting to me is we covered the AI security and privacy guide from OWASP a couple months ago, and there was a little bit of overlap, but also some gaps. And I think actually that the OWASP guide has a little bit more meat to it. And we've also covered some research, some documentation from Trail of Bits as well. So it's nice to see the community, AppSec, call it product security, what have you, looking at this, but it still feels early days that we're going to be iterating on those OWASP guides. Thankfully, not a top 10 list in this area. So I think this one was, again, there wasn't too much meat there, but I at least wanted to throw it on the table and see how we could dissect it.
How it gets attacked. Yeah, I think one of the thoughts I have around this was, is this post aimed towards us or more towards the business types which keep going, machine learning AI? I saw someone, I doubt this is a listener. I don't think I'm calling someone out to say this on air. I saw a Tesla this week with a license plate of AI car. I'm just going to leave that at that. Yeah, I think on the positive side, what do you think, Mike? I think prompt attacks is going to be our new sort of category of vulnerabilities for that we'll be talking about at the end of 2023.
I think so, and hopefully they'll at least be entertaining and interesting. And I think the one thing I want to add to that too is that a lot of this is very focused on the data model, but not how the application is being used. Meaning, is this AI being used in a customer support? But you could have prompt injection, as you said, prompt attacks that could cause the customer support to start spewing horrible, obscene remarks. 4chan from computer for customer support type of thing. So there will be these types of attacks, and we will keep our eyes out. So listeners, do keep us informed. Let us know if there's something else interesting and fun that's coming up. Now, we got a couple more that maybe do a whirlwind and end on one of your articles, John, because it's fun. Orca Security, they have Bad.Build, another supply chain attack in Google Cloud Build Service. I think my takeaway from this one is that IAM is hard, IAM is complex, and if you leak a little bit, then there's some privilege escalation that can be taken advantage of, and bad things can happen. Supply chain, bingo, square, ta-da. That's the best I can do.
Congratulations, you have won. I know we've got a few, so I want to keep it short on this. I think when I saw this, I didn't look at it too closely, but my thought was, the way we always talk as an industry as assume compromise about our products or infrastructure. I think it's becoming more and more of that when you go to the cloud, unfortunately. Some vendors are better than others, it seems, but at the same time, you can, play spin the Orca bottle or spin the Whiz bottle at any of these guys, and it seems like they're going to find something, which is, congrats to them. That's amazing work. But for the rest of us, I think we really need to think about, okay, I'm going into the cloud, pick a color. How am I going to secure stuff that I'm doing in it? Like, you really have to think through for each sort of step you're doing. What could happen? How am I going to prevent that? And how am I going to respond to it? So that's my 2 cents on that.
Absolutely. And I think to wrap up real quick, I had one other article that was just a list of awesome industrial protocols, which goes really deep on bizarre areas. And I thought it was really fun because I do love reading about protocols. They could be fun things to take apart, how so many of them might be really obscure and not really useful. But the LoRaWAN, if there's going to be one that you point out to, LoRaWAN is probably good, and maybe Zigbee if you want to pick two to read through. And of those, read about those protocols because the implementations could time to go fuzz, find some vulns, and that could be related to some tetraburst that you found there, John.
Yeah, LoRaWAN is slowly catching on, and Zigbee is too. Zigbee I used to be a Z-Wave guy. I thought Z-Wave was going to take over the market, but Zigbee is slowly coming back. So yeah, lots of those. Tetraburst is interesting. Excuse me. I think this just got released today on Monday. And what's going on here, folks? It's a good read once again, but at a really high quick level for you. This is a radio standard which was used by both law enforcement, military, and critical infrastructure, not just in the U.S. but globally. So this is something that could be used for controlling oil and gas sites, water systems. So it's not just, by default, even when I saw this, I think radio, like 2A, breaker, whatever, come get me. I need help in making this a story. So this is this thing which had been sort of kept behind closed doors and not really allowed people to access or play with it because, national security. Folks finally got their hands on it, and they found not just a list of vulnerabilities, but the system is actually backdoored. So, yeah, and the as all good vulnerability families, this has a website which we've linked to with 5 different CVEs from low to critical. No, Mike, I don't know which CVSS standard that's based on. They're all really great, but so folks, go take a look at this. It seems like we're getting some good stuff right now pre-Black Hat, but hopefully we'll get some more in the next few weeks as well.
Will. And time to start playing with some more software-defined radio as well, because I think we're hitting on a lot of that area. So that looks like at least make Mr. Kinsella happy. But we also need to make everyone happy and move on to the interview. So I want to say a quick thanks to John, quick thanks to everyone who's been listening so far. We're going to take a quick break and return with this week's interview.